Do your song and dance routine.
All right, we'll kick this thing off. Y'all ready? Another treat from Dennis. Starts off this afternoon, and his topic is along the Central. Yeah.
Okay. It's easier on the eyes.
Can you hear me okay? Nathan? Okay.
What?
You might say something?
Well,
Hey, for testing.
talk over the music.
just now finding out that every copy of this I've ever sold has got your name on it.
Oh, very good. All right, pardon the musical interlude there.
What did we find out? Is it gonna work with it?
So Jason has strategically placed this program right after lunch. This is the longest, probably the longest program of the entire symposium. So I will try to expeditiously go through the slides in this program. So for those of you who were here last year, you may recall that I presented a program on the Houston and Texas Central Naliva-Mejia cutoff, an obscure secondary line. And since then I decided, well, I would expand upon that and do a little more comprehensive look at the Houston, Texas Central Railroad. So in the intervening year, that's what I've done, and that's what I hope to present to you today. The way in which I'm going to present this is kind of several ways. I'm going to do a little history. I'm going to touch upon some special topics like Chinese labor, gauge change. Also going to look at construction specifically north of Dallas up to Denison, or actually Red River City, because most of the folks here I think are more familiar with that part of the railroad than the southern end of the railroad. And then finally I'm going to look at some vestiges of the railroad that still exist to this day, places, structures, and so forth that you can actually find and see. And then a few miscellaneous items to wrap it up. So let's go ahead and get started. So prior to the Civil War in Texas, there were about 10 operating railroads and almost 3 times as many stagecoach lines. And Texas was pretty much isolated, except by road and by the Gulf of Mexico and river. So in 1848, oddly enough, for a railroad that became associated with Houston, several businessmen in Galveston chartered a railroad called the Galveston Red River Railroad. It wasn't until later that another gentleman by the name of Paul Bremond got the enterprise going. He was kind of a go-getter, mover and shaker, and he was able to get the Galveston Red River Railroad to break ground and start the construction. And they built up to a place called Cypress City, today it's just called Cypress, by 1856. In that same year, the charter was amended and the name was changed from Galveston Red River to Houston and Texas Central Railway Company. Okay, a more familiar name. Later on in 1890, or around 1890, that name was changed a little bit to Houston and Texas Central Railroad as opposed to Railway. And they changed the "and" to an ampersand. So small changes like that. You see that in the history of railroads, where during a reorganization, they change a few words around to rename a particular railroad company. 1856, the railroad was open for 81 miles out of Houston to a place called Milliken, and that's where it stopped during the Civil War. Now, I'm not going to say much about the railroad during the Civil War. It basically was operational, but it didn't thrive. There was a Confederate camp at Milliken, and the railroad did serve it until the end of the Civil War. All right, we've got a map here. Off to the lower right corner, you might see the town of Cypress, Houston is off here, it's on the map, you can kind of see the H. First letter of the Houston. So it built up to here to Hempstead, then up here to Milliken is where it stopped during the Civil War, and then in 1867 it continued north. Well, you see a line also going west out of Hempstead. That was a line that was built toward Austin. It was originally called the Washington County Railroad, and it was taken over by the H&TC, continued westward toward Austin. All right, Chinese. Most of you, I think, know the story of the Central Pacific, that quite a few Chinese laborers were brought to the United States to work on the Central Pacific and building their line over the Sierra Nevadas, across the Great Basin to the final link up with the Union Pacific. Well, once that project was finished, some of those laborers were sent to Texas to work on the Houston, Texas Central. There was one contingent of laborers that went east with a fellow by the name of General John Walker, as far as St. Louis. Then they went down the Mississippi River to New Orleans and got on the ship and went to Galveston. And then from Galveston, they went to the railhead at Calvert at the time. It was an experiment that didn't last long. There was some sort of strife between the Chinese laborers and the either management or the other laborers, and so within a year they were basically let go. Just a few notes here from newspapers about Chinese labor. If you look at the middle newspaper article, here's a firm in Houston that was recruiting or trying to get planners and railroads to hire some of these Chinese laborers. The article on the left from 1870 talks about some Norwegians that were coming to work on the railroad, and also mentions the Chinese as well. And then the article on the right again mentions Chinese laborers around Calvert. And of course they had their own peculiar things that they needed in terms of food and stuff, clothing and whatnot. And so there was a little bit of a business that catered to the Chinese laborers. All right, another issue here is the fact that the Houston, Texas Central was built in 2 different gauges. Early on, the Texas legislature mandated a 6-foot gauge, later amended to a 5'6" gauge. That became known as either Texas or Southern Broad Gauge. So the H&TC was built from Houston all the way up to Corsicana in broad gauge. Somewhere along the line, management decided that north of Corsicana, they were going to build the railroad to standard gauge. And I'm sure that was dictated by the fact that there was a link up with some railroad, as it turns out the Katy Railroad, north of the Red River, and they needed to be able to interchange. So they decided to continue building to standard gauge north of Corsicana. Now, as it turns out, there were 3 places along the Houston and Texas Central where there was 2 different gauges. Corsicana, of course, Houston, Texas Central broad gauge, Houston, Texas Central standard gauge. Okay. At Hearn, Houston, Texas Central broad gauge, And then you had the International Railroad, or International Great Northern, as it's later known, the standard gauge. So you had a difference of gauges at Hearn as well. Now, what I didn't know until just a few days ago was that at Bremond was another change of gauge. Houston and Texas Central, broad gauge, and the Waco Tap, or Waco and Northwestern, was built to standard gauge. So at those three locations, you had difference of gauge. Of course, that brings along with it problems, okay? Because if you have a train full of cargo and passengers in broad gauge, you're going to need to transfer those cargoes and passengers to a train of a different gauge. You're going to have to transload the cargo or the passengers one way or another. So it's an operational headache. It takes time, and it takes, in some cases, equipment. So at Corsicana, they actually had machinery that would lift cars off their trucks, take out the old trucks, slide in new trucks, and then set them back down. So you can imagine that's it's time consuming. It's also could be hazardous, and it's just a general headache. So eventually, 1874, the Houston and Texas Central decided to re-gauge its railroad in three parts. First, from Corsicana to Hearn. All right. And when they did that, machinery that was at Corsicana that was necessary to lift cars off the trucks were shipped down to Hearn. And then in 1876, the rest of the main line from Hearn to Houston was re-gauged to standard gauge. And then later on, the western branch, the branch over to Austin, was re-gauged to standard gauge. From what I've read, the old broad gauge equipment that had been on the main line was basically relegated to the Austin branch until it wore out, and then they could change the gauge to standard gauge. Also in Hearn, before the gauge change, the H&TC had an acre or two of land and a loading dock area so that they could store the cargo that was destined for the IGN, or the cargo coming off the IGN. They could stage it there until it was transloaded onto one of their own H&TC trains. All right. For those of you of a certain age and have lived in the area, you probably are familiar with Sanger Harris, department store called Sanger Harris, which was actually a consolidation of Sanger Brothers and Harrison Company. Sometime in the 1960s, the two department stores merged. But before Sanger Harris existed, the Sanger Brothers basically launched stores, their own stores, as the railroad advanced north. So you had Sanger Brothers stores at Hearn, Calvert, Bremond, Cossie, Groesbeck, Corsicana, Dallas, and Sherman. So this is just one example of where the merchants advanced with the railroad. I think we're missing a slide here. Hold on. Yeah. Forgot to mention here with this slide here that 1867, just as the railroad was beginning to advance north of Milligan, unfortunately there was a widespread epidemic of yellow fever, which is a mosquito-borne disease, quite debilitating. And it affected most of the Gulf Coast region, but especially affected Milligan. So imagine trying to get healthy laborers to advance the railroad northward when you have this yellow fever epidemic. And yellow fever was a disease that reared its ugly head from periodically from year to year. There was another big epidemic in 1873. All right, just very briefly, here's a chronology of how the railroad was built north of Bryan, or Bryan and Northwood. I'm not going to read it to you here. Notice the Austin branch, or the western branch, which stemmed off of Hempstead, was completed in 1871 over in Austin. Corsicana, also in 1871. The early shops were in Corsicana. Not many people know that. Later on, they were moved to Ennis. You have to wonder, looking at these dates, why it took so long for the H&TC to finally reach the Red River. There's no major natural obstacles for it to overcome. There's no mountain ranges, inland seas, and so forth. So really, I think progress is relatively slow. There's, Chambers Creek had to be bridged. Trinity River south of Dallas had to be bridged. But other than that, the terrain was fairly tame for building a railroad. Okay, here's an ad, Dallas paper. It notes that on or after July 15th, 1872, you can expect service to Dallas. They must have reran that ad because it's dated November 9th. So, same ad, but just rerun over and over. On July 16th is when they had the big barbecue in Dallas for the arrival of the H&TC. So at the very beginning, the H&TC ran an express train between Houston and Dallas, and they ran an accommodation or mixed train from Houston to Corsicana. All right, a little bit more fine detail about construction north of Dallas. I'll let you read that on your own. Talks about Plano, McKinney, a little town or community. Was it Mantua or Mantua? Mantua, thank you. Basically, they ended up moving the town to where Van Alstyne is today. Okay.
And Anna.
Yeah.
What created Anna.
Okay. This slide illustrates one of the most convoluted affairs in railroad history that I've ever run across. All right. H&TC, by charter, was to head for the Red River somewhere between the northeast corner of the state to a place called Coffee Station. Coffee Station moved around over time. It was basically a trading post. Basically ended up by this time frame where Preston is. Now Preston today is covered up by Lake Texoma, but it's north of Pottsboro, I think. Anyway, that was their goal. Well, of course, they knew that the Katy was going south through the Indian Territory, and at some point, the two railroads must have decided the general area where they were going to both arrive at. Now, this map is 1885. Okay, Katy bridged the Red River. I think it was on Christmas Day, 1872, or Christmas Eve. They got there first. They set up camp there. They had real estate agents out selling land plots and so forth. By the way, this is as much a real estate deal as it is a railroad deal. Okay. H&TC was not going to hear anything about that. Denison, Fooey on the Katy. They were headed for a place called Red River City, which is a little bit closer to the Red River. So basically, you ended up with two parallel railroads. I don't know how far apart they were, whether they were within a few hundred feet or side by side, certainly within a mile or two. But you had these two railroads from the Red River down to Denison. The two railroads really had a rivalry going on. H&TC would not recognize the Katie's right of way. They were going to bring the passengers and freight up. They were going to bring it all the way to Red River City. Katie did the same thing. They were going to Denison. They weren't going to stop at Red River City. So if you read newspaper accounts back then, there was this constant battle between the two railroads. Katie would bring their freight down to Denison. The H&TC would bring their freight up to Red River City, and then they run shuttle trains between the two places. Okay?
How far was that? Maybe 4 miles?
You mean between Red River City and Denison? Yeah, at most 10. Okay? Not that. As far as passengers go, this is bizarre. If you were coming from the south in the H&TC, heading north, you got off at Sherman, you had to buy a separate ticket on the H&TC to go to Denison, which the H&TC did not officially recognize as a station. Even though they stopped there, they weren't going to recognize it as a station. So you got off in Sherman, bought a new ticket, took the train up to Denison. They must have had to let you off. Same thing with the baggage. And then the train would continue north of Red River City. So this went on for about a year, and people got frustrated about it. Cargo was stacking up in Denison, okay, because of the ongoing rift between the two railroads. Okay, people were complaining about it in newspapers. Passengers were complaining about it. It was a mess. Well, after about a year, they finally, H&TC finally gave in, and they started officially serving Denison. Okay, then you start having through trains.
One of the things that was happening was that Katie was trying to get to Fort Worth, and they ended up leasing H&TC to get to Plano to switch over to Cotton Belt to Fort Worth. They did that until about 1915.
All right, very brief summary here of a Reporter's Manual about the H&TC in 1874. And by the way, I'm going to confirm what Ken said earlier. Don't implicitly trust everything that's printed in Reporter's Manual. Okay. Some of the information is incorrect. For example, I think it's in the 1870 or 71 Reporter's Manual. It stated that the H&TC was entirely 4 feet 8.5 inches. It's not true. It was dual gauge. Half of, part of the railroad was broad gauge, part of it was standard gauge. So, I don't know whether that was a mistake or intentional on the part of the railroad. All right, so by 1873, the railroad, the main line was pretty much finished, done with. There were some branches that were built, Fort Worth and Waco, and some other extensions that were planned, and I'll show you in the next slide, which is a map. The Southern Pacific took control over in the late 1800s, 1880s, and then in the early 1900s, the H&TC, along with a couple other Texas lines, were bunched together under this brand name called Sunset Central. And you'll see that up until the eve of World War I. Okay, it was really a branding thing. It wasn't really a new railroad. You had the Houston East and West Texas, H&TC, and some of the other lines of the Southern Pacific lumped together. All right, here's a map. Let's see if I can get that. Where did it work? Trick to this, Jason? Give me a pointer. There you go, okay. Okay, all right, so, here's Houston right here. I think this is the GH&SA. Here's the western branch that goes to Austin. Right here is Hempstead, goes up here to Bremond, and then the Waco Northwestern is built up to Waco. And then it was later extended up to Albany, Texas. This was the northwestern branch of the Texas Central. And by the way, back in the day, the H&TC was generally called either the Central or sometimes the Texas Central. Not to be confused with the later spinoff that went up in this direction right here. This became a kind of an independent railroad, and then later the Katy took it over and built it further west. All right, here you've got the northeast extension, which later became Texas Midland. And on up here to Denison, Rayburn City. This is the TNP right here. This is also the TNP right here. There was also at one time contemplated a western branch that would go up the Texas Panhandle, and that never happened. All right, some of you already know a lot of the place names that you find along the H&TC were named after officials of the railroad. And this is not an all-encompassing list, but it's a list of some of the common ones. Howell, Texas, for example, was named after the chief engineer of the H&TC, and there's probably dozens and dozens of other place names that were named after H&TC officials. Okay, now we're going to take a fictional journey up the main line, starting in Houston. I love that center picture there. That's a piece of sheet music that I found years ago. I thought it was appropriate for this program. So we're going to start in Houston here. Place to start is Houston's Grand Central Station. Okay. Sometime in the 1880s, this edifice was constructed. It lasted until 1934, I believe, when the more modern Grand Central Station was built. One of the features of Grand Central was it had a covered train shed, completely covered, about three or four tracks. The only other place I know of that had one in Texas was Galveston. Had a covered train shed at one time. So under the shed, now this is a little chronologically out of place. We've jumped from the late 1800s to about 1920. So we have the cracked sunbeam. This is the non-streamlined version, which was inaugurated in 1925. So how would you like to be on the observation platform ready to depart in luxury? All right, a few times along the way. We're not going to cover all the stations and depots and whatnot, but Rosebeck, notice how they spell it, by the way. E-C-K. Hempstead. More depots. Ennis and Corsicana. Corsicana, of course, is a union station between the Cotton Belt and the H&TC. Ennis was also a union station at some point. Texas Midland also used that depot as well. Now, of course, that's not the depot that's there today. The depot that's there today was actually the former Van Noy restaurant. Okay. And that was used toward the end of passenger service. I think this depot, this two-story depot here, which was also division headquarters, burned or partially burned in the 30s. So that may have been the reason they switched the depot from this structure here to the former Van Noy restaurant. Look how clean that track is. Yeah. Okay, the western branch, you have Austin, which was also used by the Katy Railroad as well. Notice that tower-looking thing there in front of the depot? Anybody know what that is? Jason will give you $100 and you guess correctly what that is. That's a moonlight tower, so you get to pay yourself $100. Yeah, Austin still has a handful of what they call moonlight towers. They're all around the city at one time to light up the central part of the city. Few exist. This one doesn't. All right, Brenham Depot there at Brenham, which is the Union Depot, Santa Fe, H&TC, and then way out in the western part, there was a depot at Lampasas. Okay, infrastructure, a bridge somewhere. I have no idea where on the railroad it was, but it was labeled H&TC, so I used it. Houston Roundhouse, H&TC Roundhouse. Hearn Roundhouse with number 86. A view of the Ennis shops, or at least part of them. I think I told you earlier that the shops were moved from Corsicana to Ennis. Okay. Shops were originally in Corsicana. I think it was around 1890 or so that move was made to move the shops north to Ennis. All right, some various pieces of equipment here. Steam locomotive, boxcar. I tried to find a picture of H&TC boxcar that had the logo emblazoned on it, and I wasn't able to find a good one. But typically you would find the H&TC logo emblazoned on some of the boxcars. The picture up above that you may recognize from my Neliva cutoff presentation last year. That was the construction train building that cutoff. All right, we can't forget passenger service. Here's a list of named passenger trains in the 20th century. In the 19th century, they weren't so colorful. They were usually things like Mail Express, Texas Express, and so forth. They got a little bit more colorful into the 20th century. And the last three are the three remaining passenger trains that really ran on the line in the modern era, what I call the SP era. H&TC basically kind of, the name at least, kind of disappeared starting in the 1920s.
1934 was in TNO.
Yeah, TNO was, you started to see that, and then Southern Pacific, and then that was it. So the Owl, the Hustler, and the Sunbeam, the last three trains that ran on the old H&TC. I look at this newspaper ad, and I think to myself, this is a promotion for the Sting. That dapper fellow there, this has got to be a movie ad promotion for the Sting. But it's not. It's for a train that was introduced in 1910 called the Hustler. Started out Houston to Denison, later extended to Galveston, and then through connections from Frisco on up to Kansas City. And this name was used, the Hustler remained in use name up until, I think, the early 30s. And then it disappeared until the Streamline Sunbeam came along, and as a companion train to the Sunbeam, the Hustler name was resurrected. All right, here's the story here. Believe it or not, in the 1880s, more people in North Texas read newspapers from St. Louis and places up north than they did newspapers here in the state, like the Dallas News. So the Dallas News wasn't going to have it anymore. So they inaugurated two, what they call newspaper trains. One on the T&P to deliver the morning news, well, it wasn't called the morning news, Dallas News, over along the line north. And then in 1887, they inaugurated a newspaper train. It's a charter train, basically, up the H&TC from Dallas, early in the morning, all the way up to Denison, flying along at a breathtaking 50 to 60 miles an hour, throwing out newspapers along the way. I want to make sure you weren't standing by the right away when they were doing this. So here's a photograph of that train. It did carry passengers. Left pretty early in the morning, 4:30. The gentleman on the front passenger car on the vestibule is said to be George Dealey, the editor of the Dallas News. The train was also called the Comet. Dallas News Train, Comet, same thing. Here's something I put together from public timetables. It's a little graph here or chart of passenger service, south end versus north end. You know, Houston to Dallas, I'm calling it south end. Dallas to Denison is the north end. And you can see that as far as Dallas to Denison goes, it peaked in about 1908, and then rapidly dropped off after that. Any guesses why? Texas Electric, interurban, and the automobile. Okay, you can see it goes from 4 train pairs a day to 1 train pair a day between 1908 and 1914. And then at the very end, Dallas to Denison was basically a motor car train, which I've illustrated in the lower right. Now, I'm not saying that's the exact motor car train that ran on the Dallas to Denison, but it's an example, okay? And of course, the last Dallas to Houston train was the overnight Owl, which ceased in 1958. All right, rather colorful array of H&TC public timetables from about 1891 to 1915. The one on the far left has, I think, a story behind it. Sometime in the 1880s, Bill Sterrett, either a reporter or editor for the Dallas News, dubbed the H&TC the Angel Maker, because they had a lot of wrecks, killing people, or maiming them. All right. So I think in response to his low blow to their corporate ego, they came out with this timetable with all the Lucky Charms on it: Shamrock, Rabbit's Foot, Horseshoe, etc. Okay, here's an array of passes. H&TC at the top, and then some of the lines that were acquired by the H&TC, like the Waco Northwestern, Austin Northwestern, Texas Central. And I attribute these to Jimmy Barlow, whose grade school teachers thought that he would never pass, but he sure showed them, didn't he? All right. Okay, freight, very important part of the railroad. Here are the commodities that H&TC transported. Cotton was probably if number one, if not number two. This I thought was rather unusual. I just kind of stumbled on this by what we call serendipity. Okay. Newspaper photo from the Howe Enterprise, an oats train, a unit oats train. That's probably the earliest unit train I've ever seen. Solid oats. Old timers said that the track was so bad that by the time the train got to its destination, the cargo was all Quaker oats. All right, freight rates. This is kind of interesting comparison. 1853, of course, you all had for inland travel, pretty much, with a few exceptions, a few rivers, was by wagon. So $3 a hundredweight, and that depended, of course, on various factors. And then by 1872, when you had H&TC, at least as far as Dallas, the rates were almost a third, not quite a third, but a third as much. So that made definitely an economic impact on transporting goods. Okay, so we're up to Dallas now. This is the old Union Depot. It was in East Dallas. It was shared with the H&TC, I think is the line over there where the passenger train is, and the line going left to right is the T&P. Now something interesting I found out, of course, in 1916, Union Terminal in Dallas consolidated the passenger trains of almost all the railroads. But I found out that up until 1921, T&P still stopped at this station. Okay. North of that depot, right away was rather slummy, full of junk, mud, barking dogs, and so forth. That's what it looked like. That area, well actually the Union Depot that I showed you kind of defined the western edge of what is known today as Deep Ellum. And then north of there was a area called Stringtown on up to what was called Freemantown, and then on north. So that junky part of the H&TC north of Union Depot, the lower left photo is not quite as junky. That's what it looked like. That became the right of way for Central Expressway. Central Expressway is not named because it's central to Dallas. It's named because it took over part of the right of way of the Houston, Texas Central. So the photo on the top is, I'm going to say it's pretty close to Mockingbird Lane. That's got to be the Katy going over the future Central Expressway. And I think the actual right-of-way of the H&TC is probably just a little to the right of where they're grading the highway. And then, of course, in the lower right is what the Central Expressway looked in 1949, 1950, when it was brand spanking new. So really, the right-of-way up to Mockingbird is the part that was taken over by the expressway. North of that is not on railroad right-of-way. All right, depots. Plano. It's like a combination freight passenger depot. Allen. This is a photo of their depot at one time. What they have today, of course, is a replica. McKinney. One on the left, I think, is pretty much modern era freight depot. One in the lower right is Union Depot, which was shared with, well, the railroad of many names. Katy, East Line of Red River, Sherman, Shreveport, and Southern, Louisiana Railway Navigation of Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas. All right, take your pick. All right, so that was the joint depot there. East Fork of the Trinity River, which is just north of McKinney. Bridge without train, bridge with a train. You know, I'm not entirely sure that's the same bridge, even though they were labeled as such.
It's not.
I don't think so. But having said that, that's a through truss type bridge. And there are only 3 through truss type bridges that I know of north of Plano. There's one at Rowlett Creek, just south between Allen and Plano. There's one at Wilson Creek, which is just south of McKinney. And then there's this one, the Trinity River, East Fork of the Trinity River. Those are the only through truss bridges I know of north of Plano. All right, Melissa. Best photo I can find of Melissa Depot. Van Alstyne. I'm going to guess that the one on the right is a truncated version of the one on the left. Sherman Union Depot. Not many people know about this one. So up until 1943, this grand structure was the passenger depot for H&TC, Frisco, and T&P. Katy had their own separate depot, a few blocks away. So in 1943, they abandoned this, and the remaining railroads that had passenger service basically used their freight depots as passenger depots.
The Cotton Belt didn't exist.
That's right, I'm sorry. Cotton Belt, yeah. Yeah, there are 3 railroads that use this depot. Let's see. TB, H&TC, Frisco. What a grand structure. It's too bad that thing didn't get preserved. This is the old Denison Depot, not the one that's there today. This is the original Denison Depot. It's actually a combination of depot and hotel. Why so long? Okay, now we get to the part, vestiges of the H&TC. What remains that you can still find today of that railroad? Okay, just south of Allen is Creek Bridge. The through truss bridge on the left is the H&TC bridge. The one directly in front of us with the wires over it is the Texas Electric Bridge. The through truss bridge is still there. It's rather overgrown, but it's there. The Stone Dam in Allen, what a treasure. This was uncovered in the last decade or 2. This is a dam that produced a reservoir to feed water to a water tank. This is about a mile or 2 north of the central part of Allen. It's worth a visit sometime. They have a nice display there showing pictures and diagrams of the water tank and I think there was a section house nearby and so forth. And by the way, much to the chagrin of the historical people in Allen, this wasn't the only stone dam on the H&TC. There is, or was, might still be, one up south of Sherman on Choctaw Creek. As late as the 1930s, there were still local people going there to swim. They could swim in the pool of water behind that dam. I've looked on aerial photos, can't see any indication, it's overgrown. You'd almost have to get a drone or a canoe, go in there and see if you can. And of course, it may be silted up, or it may have been busted open by the railroad, who knows? All right, these are the water stations from Dallas North to Denison. The milepost, Cottonwood is the one just north of Dallas. I'm Steve Allen. North of Allen, there's a brick and stone arch bridge, which is still there, and it's a historical structure. Jimmy, you and I went there many years ago. As you go north, well, actually from Allen on north, at various places you'll find culverts that date back to the early Houston and Texas Central. And is Eldon, you awake? Your show. All right, so this is one of the few remaining depots along the line. It's been beautifully restored. Has the addition of a steam locomotive in front of it. And so I would highly recommend you visit this sometime if you haven't already. I'm sure Eldon Baker will give you a first-class tour if you notify him.
Might know somebody with a key.
There's a story behind this. A few years ago, I went to a reception dinner for a niece in Austin, and it was this place called Swift's Attic, which is, I think, at 3rd and Congress. It's an upstairs venue, bar, restaurant. I was walking around the place, and I look over there along the brick wall, and I see this wall ad for the Sunset Central, along with a map. Oh my gosh, I said, can this really be authentic? Is it a reproduction? Is it the real thing? I think it's the real thing. Very unique. I'm guessing that was a wall ad on an adjoining building, and that was never painted over or covered up. And so when this restaurant took over, they just kept the ad. Very unusual. Of course, the map shows you pretty much, well, it shows you a little bit of the main line, but also shows you the Austin branch. Okay, speaking of new place for tired people, I know you're all tired, and I would love to go to this. This is the Antlers again, built by the H&TC in Kingsland. Highly recommend you go there at least once. It's a real gem. Springtime in the hill country. This line that goes from Kingsland on out to Llano is in the springtime just a wonderful place to take pictures of the blue mountains. And there are several bridges like this, through truss bridges along that line. I think, Myron, how many of them are there? 6, 7, 8?
Yeah, about 5 or 6, something like that.
Okay.
And some of the stories I've heard is some of those truss bridges were relocated from other SP locations out onto the Llano Branch.
Okay. Could be.
Are they ever gonna get that open again?
It's, from Fairland Y out to Llano, it's still owned by Capital Metro, the transit agency out of Austin. There are no freight customers from the Fairland Y out west. So motor car group I'm part of gets to operate our equipment out there, but there's no commercial reason for freight service, and it'll be another generation or two before passenger service will be needed out that far.
mentioned earlier, one of the milestone locations that was first reached by the Galveston and Red River was Cypress, or Cypress City, they called it back then, or Cypress Top, that's another name. Photo there on the left of the original depot, and of course the one that's there today in the little historical park is a reproduction, replica. But inside they have historical exhibits, including the railroad. So if you're ever down that way, you might want to check it out. There are only two H&TC steam locomotives left. There's number 314, what's it, 460. There's number 319, which was in Illinois and has moved to Georgia and is in pretty sad shape. So better to enjoy this one. It's in very good shape.
We tried to get the 119, but he didn't want to sell it.
Yeah. Another Jimmy Barlow special photograph here. All right, Tower 16 in the background with a more modern piece of motor power. That tower, of course, has been saved. It's over in Rayburn. Okay, that's enough for vestiges of the H&TC. There are some other depots left, not many, and some other structures and so forth, but I'm going to leave it at that. So what became of the H&TC? Of course, the south part of it, Dallas to Houston, still in town, used by UP. North of Dallas has been severed. Part of it is part of the dark red line, but there's still freight service from Sherman down to McKinney by DG and that photo there, best guesses are it's either at Plano or Sherman. Anybody have a better idea? Yeah, it looks like an approach semaphore there, approach signal, so you would either be Sherman or Plano. You go with Sherman? Okay.
Well, from Sherman to Denison, still exists as the BNSF main line.
Yeah, okay, I mentioned that. Okay. 1878, there was a rash of robberies by the Sandasses gang. They hit two H&TC locations and two GMP locations around Dallas. All right. The first robbery was at Allen, and there's some controversy about where it actually happened. Did it happen at the water station where that dam was, or did it actually happen in the town proper? There's some conflicting information in newspaper reports. Some say the site was 6 miles south of McKinney, which was listed at the water tower, or 8 miles. So I've had this discussion with the Allen Heritage Guild. They tend to lean toward the center of town more than the water tower, although the water tower seems like a logical place to have a Hogan. Yeah. So I'm not going to rule out the water tower yet. And I think one of the gentlemen there in Allen told me that in 1878 there wasn't much of a platform. There wasn't really a station, a depot as such. All right, some various ads here that you find in newspapers back in the day. One on the left shows you all the train service to Dallas at the time, 1874. A pair of Mail and Express trains and a pair of mixed trains on the Central, and then Mail and Express and mixed train on GMP. Rates back then, you could go from McKinney to Houston for $4.70 excursion rate. For those of you who are familiar with the New Orleans or Louisiana, Southern Louisiana term line out, it means a little something extra. I threw these in here. Newspaper article on the left mentions back in 1870s, one of the prime cargoes for a while was buffalo hides. And they were stacking up in places like McKinney, Sherman, Fort Worth. They bring their wagon, and then the railroad got to haul that cargo out. So it was a short-lived, I guess, lucrative source of revenue.
What does that word?
Huh? Line out.
What is it?
It means it's slang, Southern Louisiana slang for us. A little something extra. All right, on the very right, there's an article here. Teddy Roosevelt was coming through on tour, 1905, came down through the Indian Territory. Towns in Texas were just clamoring to be able to get his train to stop. Some guy who's a bank clerk in McKinney wrote to His Excellency Theodore Roosevelt, please stop in McKinney, even for 5 minutes. Well, it ended up he stopped in Sherman, didn't stop in McKinney, and then went on to Dallas. Local kids either took the train up to Sherman to see the president, or took the train down to Dallas to see the president. When the train stopped. Of course, it came on through McKinney, it just didn't stop. A little bit of local history. Okay. 1911, H&TC produced these lithographs of their brand new Hustler train that was a joint H&TC Frisco train. And it says the station agent there in McKinney presented one to the local newspaper. Notice the forms of transportation here. You got very early aeroplane, early automobile, and then of course the sleek, fast Hustler train. Okay, so we're at the end there. It was very common back in the early 1900s, maybe late 1800s, to a photo studio would have these props where you would, if you're fixing to take a train trip, they would change the name of the train. You'd stand behind the guardrail there, and they'd take your photo. I think that's Myron Malone in the middle there. What do y'all think? I think it's Myron.
You got the same hair.
Yeah. Well, that's why he has a hat on. Okay, here are my resources. I want to say one final thing before I get off this podium. The history of the H&TC would have been entirely different in the early 20th century. Could have been. And the reason I say that is in the early years of 1900s, B.F. Yoakum, who was in charge of the Rock Island, who was desperately trying to get access to the Gulf Coast, was negotiating with E.H. Harriman to get access either to the H&TC or the Texas trunk line down to Beaumont. There were various deals that were proposed about getting the Rock Island, their access to the Gulf Coast. None of them panned out. Of course, they ended up buying an interest in the Trinity of Brazos Valley. But just think how different the H&TC's history would have been in the 20th century had the Rock Island taken control, or partial control. I'll leave you with that thought. All right, thank you.
Cue the music.
Huh? Music, oh yeah, keep music. What's that music? Hey, guys.
there's music out here.
All right, appreciate that. This is very good. And, we'll get Steve's music queued up for him here, man. I have to get my tech guy that knows where he hooked up while ago. To do the right stuff before us. We'll,
He's probably not.
take a break just a minute and get this running and we'll.
You still awake back there?
We had.
Need to kill the one in the middle.
Hey, that's the best one.
I did also acknowledge another gentleman for this symposium. I think probably must be known, Tim Blackwell, runs the cow catcher. He called me up the other day, he said, "Y'all want some for the symposium?" I said, "Sure." So I'm on, so this is, if you hadn't already got one, there's a stack of cow catchers, the latest edition off the press, showed up at my house, so they're right over there, and you're welcome to a copy of that, compliments of Tim Blackwell. Appreciate you for
Nice,
that.
thank you.
That's good.
You will have to kill us.
He's just trying to be.
I'm not going to play this, if you want me to sing, show me what to do. see how this is gonna look. Oh, there, okay. All right.
All right, for our final presentation this afternoon, we've got our friend Steve Goen who's going to give us a showing of the A-19 on its final trip. I'm going to hand the mic over to Steve.
That'd be a pleasure. Okay, the video we're about to watch is the final trip that the 819 ever made. We didn't know it at the time. Everybody kind of hoped that it might get to run a little longer, but with the UP merger, that was the end of it. So, this is the trip that it made from Tyler all the way down, from Pine Bluff, I'll get it out in a minute, from Pine Bluff to Texarkana down to Tyler, and in that year they did a special little extra trip that went down to Athens. Yonder. There it goes. Shame I didn't have a digital camera back in those days. You said something about the whistle on it, that's a Frisco whistle. Talking about whistle, the thing with the engine sounded like crap over the years on pedal steel. And tried to piece it back together and screw the whistle up. So this got a Frisco, I think it's a 4400 class whistle on it. Jason, if you're in here, do you know how to change the picture aspect on this one? Just playing it at wide, it needs to be regular because it's so ugly.
Not sure.
But back when this was shot, you couldn't change the aspect on camera. What's those, last trailing engines in those cars, Kelly? Look at that. Yeah, I was standing out there and I saw that start, I was wondering, do I want to stand here or not? Wow. Didn't show that video to Union Pacific, and then I want Norfolk Southern for that. He's still back.
Not that part of it. I rode Tyler to Athens.
shot the Challenger, not the Challenger, the big boy, this same spot over here. Same spot.
There's a rear car on the way back in town. They didn't. They wouldn't do a siding and ran the locomotive back and they pulled it back and they put diesels on the tire to haul it back.
They had to run the 819 in reverse all the way back to Tyler. They didn't have a way to turn it to that.
And they had to hopscotch that tool car.
Yeah. They originally were talking about running it all the way to Corsicana, but I don't think they could have turned it there either. I don't remember a complete why doing it in Corsicana. And this is where the line to the left can cut off. I think all that's been yanked out now.
That might have been me. I spent a lot of that on the platform.
And this is the last day that she ran out on the main line. Does anybody know if the diamond here at this location is still there, if they're taking it out?
I think it's out.
There you go, Tom. Where you at? I was watching for you out there that time. Blue Street. Didn't realize at the time I shot this, that this was a historic lifetime out here. Can you imagine what it would have been like to have the 819 pull the Blue Street this one time? I've been in charge of the PR department, I've done it. I've had commercials and everything made up, sent it out to all of our shippers. Look at what we're doing. Of course, you two would have found someone to screw it up. I did a pretty good job of getting all these good locations. I sure couldn't do it now. And I did it all by myself because Marcia and our daughters, our oldest daughter, was riding the truck. See the mark is Zorro. always try to get to Mount Pleasant Depot in all my shots. And right now I do it. What happened to this tower? Did they move it or tear it down? Or done?
All these cars, is what we say, cars, zoo cars,
Some of them were privately owned. Yeah. I don't know if anybody noticed, but I have a pretty good people filter on my whole camera. They ran that big boy last September, and there's millions of people all over there. You could get a shot of that picture. That was real nice of them to park that other train for me.
I noticed they didn't wash it out, so.
Yeah. So Carl Barnes. He lived in Camden and he always rode there right now into it. Now watch the signals over on the right. Yeah, not the very crossing signals are the other. They still have that Fordyce on Cotton Belt Festival.
I don't think they have for several years.
No?
We appreciate you bringing that and sharing those things. And memories right there. Well, I believe that is the end of our program this year. And what time it is? It's almost 4? Well, I think I had adjourned at 4 o'clock on the schedule. So we fit, this is the closest we come to fitting everything to the schedule. I think it's we ever had. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes. Well, y'all are my diehards. They'll come in here and, every year, just stick with us and help promote it and support it, and really appreciate the support y'all put into this one over the years, and we thank you. Thanks to representatives, sponsors, everyone, and put the first Saturday in August on the calendar for next year, the big 2-0. Tell your friends. We're gonna try to do it upright. Maybe have some worth remembering. All right.
Tell them to get the 819 down there.
Yeah, I need to bring the 19 to work this year. Okay, do that? All right. Well, yeah, I appreciate y'all so much. Hope to see you all again soon. Hope you safe. Take a trip home, and see you next year, if not before. Thank you.
I think after sitting between you, that's probably go over on the before it goes to CPA guys here, losing their minds to it with mortgage.
I know that. Yeah. Once you start getting up, you just gotta keep going.
It still works. Got it on there and in and out.
You got, let me call your phone and you can text back. I was gonna take a picture of it. I don't have the name. Yeah, well. You gotta have the right Happy days. Thank you very much. Okay,
And if anybody's interested, I do have copies of some of my stuff.
Well, come over here and you can take a picture of all four of us and you can stand in the middle and hold your prop.
Be prop man. I guess that's being better than being prop dust.
I was waiting for that. Okay.
Happy days. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. That's my reputation. Getting close to the
Aloha and Viet Congo.
See you later. Something like gibberish.
Don't forget your.
Yeah, I gotta go see the autograph. I gotta take some time very
Okay. Glenn, what's your phone?
If I ever decide that way, finish that Wichita call with the Southern.
Southern Indiana. That's Southern
I
Indiana.
started working on that book.
I remember I went into my local Walmart and they sold me a Southern Indiana. Hey, bud. Yeah, I got a ways to drive. Yeah, I stopped on Thursday. I did Thursday night. So I'll be yesterday. Got a haircut. Got a yeah, I'm sure it's open. I didn't go. I should have. Yeah. I've been through a lot of other stuff. So. Things are happening. Oh, did you get it? Oh, it's short. What, 8-hour drive for you?
I thought about riding the train, but it's terrible.
You get up in the middle of the night and get on. I've never been there. took that